Hi, we are Uncanny J-Men, and we are back for another week of our discussion videos. And again, we've got another episode of Moon Knight. So we're going to be discussing that here, just like we did for the last two episodes. We're on episode 3. So, warning, spoilers. Obviously, it's a discussion video, so we're going to be talking at length about the episode, previous episodes, things that are in the comics. So if you want to go into any of this season fresh, this is not where you want to start off. Come back to us after you watch episode 3.
Avengers! Assemble.
So, Josh, how'd you feel about this episode?
I felt great. There's a lot of things that we had talked about in previous weeks that showed up. And I'm going to jump right into it. I think we've got Jake Lockley.
I think so too.
So for those who maybe weren't here for our prior discussions, Jake Lockley, so in the comics, Mark Spector has kind of 5 personalities or five main existences. And it's Mark Spector, Stephen Grant, Moon Knight, and Mr. Knight. We've seen those. It's Mark Spector and Stephen Grant. We've seen those personalities. When they put the suit on, in the comics, those are kind of different personalities, and that's Moon Knight and Mr. Knight. In the show, we have Moon Knight is Mark Spector's suited up appearance, and Mr. Knight is Stephen Grant's suited up appearance. But there's a 5th one in the comics, and that is Jake Lockley, who's a taxi cab driver in the comics. I don't think he's going to be a taxi cab driver here. But we've been talking about Jake Lockley potentially showing up, that we both felt like he was going to show up at some point. And finally, we had the appearance of that fight where Stephen and Mark are taking turns fighting these people, very different ways of doing it. And all of a sudden, a 3rd personality comes out and finishes the job.
Mark is fighting. Stephen is trying to run away, trying to get back to the airport and just leave.
He's trying to end the fight. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, the fact that they're both now recognizing that they weren't the ones to do something, we've seen hints at it throughout this series so far, with maybe even the fish, the date. Like, there's a lot of small things that make it seem like it might be a 3rd person. We said about even in the credits where the face is 3 faces.
Yes.
In the credits, it's like showing almost like the 3 personalities. So yeah, it's been hinting at it, and again, it's still hints technically. They didn't straight up say it or anything yet, but the fact that they're both saying I didn't do it is showing pretty much there's going to be a new personality, most likely that Jake Lockley. Now here's a question I thought I had. We have Mark Spector, Moon Knight. We have Stephen Grant, Mr. Knight. Are we going to see a new costume as well? Is Jake Lockley going to have a costume that we haven't really seen, or is not one of the most like popular big ones that we've seen for Moon Knight?
My guess is no. I'm guessing Jake Lockley doesn't have a suit. So a couple of reasons why I feel that way. For one thing, so we're jumping a little bit to the end of the episode. At the end of the episode, we have unconscious being. Mark Spector / Stephen Grant is unconscious on the ground. I think we're going to start next week with Jake Lockley waking up. Well, they don't have Khonshu right now. Khonshu is trapped in a wooden statue in one of the Great Pyramids of Giza. So I think his time on the screen is not going to correspond with having a suit. I think the suit is going to be Mark Spector is the one who had the deal with Khonshu. So I think Moon Knight is his suit. I think the way that Stephen Grant was able to get Mr. Knight was essentially Khonshu accepting him as an alternative, because he could not summon the suit or any suit until in episode 2, until Khonshu told him to summon the suit. So Khonshu gave him permission to have a suit. And so I think that's why Stephen Grant had one. I don't think Jake Lockley is going to end up having a suit of his own.
That's a very, very good point. I didn't even think about that. Summon the suit. Like, he's like telling him to summon it. Like, if you're going to be in this body, we need to protect it. Summon the suit. And then, yeah, with Khonshu being locked up, we saw that the suit kind of like went away as Khonshu was being locked up. Like, there's not going to have those powers until he's set free from the stone.
Right. Yeah.
Interesting.
And a question on Jake Lockley. So we don't have a lot of evidence on him yet. The things that we do see, so we know, or we feel like we know that he had a different idea on how to deal with those street thugs. He killed 2 of them. We feel like he probably is the one to ask out the woman in episode 1. So he clearly doesn't have any attachment to Layla. But one thing I do notice, Stephen Grant mentions in episode 2 that he draws a line at child murder. Mark Spector also is talking about he's just a kid with that third person. So the 3 thugs, 2 of them, he has no problem fighting because they're older. One of them is much younger. And Mark Spector refuses to punch him. He just tries to incapacitate him. The thing is, Jake Lockley, if that was him or whoever that third personality was, killed 2 of them, but left the kid. So I feel like my impression right here, Mark Spector is kind of the middle of the 3. Jake Lockley's more extreme and violent. Stephen Grant is the other end of the spectrum the other way, that he doesn't want any violence if he can help it. But I still feel like they all seem to share that, at least something of a moral compass, where they are not there are some lines that none of them are willing to cross.
Yeah, and I'm definitely curious if we're going to see more parallels with Jake Lockley or whoever it may be. I'm just going to keep calling it Jake Lockley, the third personality. So I might
see, know who we're talking about.
Yeah. So with Jake Lockley, there may be a lot more parallels to Harrow, the villain, where the villain even says, and he says in this episode, he enjoyed the pain.
Yeah.
Maybe we're going to see like that Moon Knight, the whole Mark Spector, Stephen, like the whole package is actually the best for an avatar, because you will have someone who could do anything, someone who's more tactical, and then someone who's more intelligent. And it is like you can just have all 3 at different times, as we saw finally Mark giving up the body to Stephen to use some intelligence this time.
Yeah. Yeah, I definitely agree.
Now, here's a question I want to talk about as well. We've touched on it a little bit with Khonshu being locked up in stone. What do you think of the whole inside the pyramid trial, the gods' avatars? We didn't see any of the gods. We just saw their avatars. What do you think of that whole scene?
It felt suspicious to me. I mean, we knew that they weren't going to rule against Harrow, because this is a 6-episode season, not a 3-episode season. So it'd be a little bit of a boring ending to end it with a court case, and he's then locked up, and it's the end. So we knew he was going to get off. But I feel like the avatar for Osiris seemed to be kind of taking the lead, and he just felt a little too quick to jump on Harrow's side. So I have a little bit of suspicion there. I liked the overall idea of it, that there are other gods. Also, that's the Ennead, and there were, I think, 5. There were only 5 of them that showed up. Where are the other 4?
Yeah.
So it was a very interesting situation. And Hathor, I believe, was the god that had the relationship with Khonshu previously, is not actually part of the Ennead. She clearly is in the show, but she's not in real Egyptian mythology, and I don't believe she is in the MCU comics, or not the MCU, in Marvel comics. So it does make me wonder. She is one of the Egyptian gods, but I don't think she was in the Ennead, which really leads me to believe that they have a specific purpose in mind for her, and she's going to continue to be a part of this.
It's very interesting. Yeah. I mean, I felt like the trial was weird, and I mean, this episode for me, I felt like it didn't hit as true as the other 2 episodes right now. But I think a lot of it comes down to that area where it's just like a trial, and you had the Khonshu yelling Mark thing there, but then
Oscar Isaac killed it.
but then wasn't really even telling, like, he's like, this has to be foolproof. Then they get in there and then just completely botches it. It was terrible. Like there was no real accusation talking about the scarab to even get to Emmet. Like Emmet. There's a whole bunch of different ways I've seen it spelled throughout the comics. ITETUT, EM, AM. Like it's been all over the place. But if it was weird, it almost felt like bad writing to me. But I feel like there's got to be a purpose to it. If it was just so that they fail the trial, it felt, I don't know, it felt off for me personally. That
yeah. I mean, it was a tough situation that the writers and the showrunners that they put them in there, because they had to get Harrow off. So I'm accepting it to me that it's just that Khonshu is a very flawed Egyptian deity, that he is so imperfect, so not godly, that he is prone to outbursts, that he gets angry, that he loses control of his own emotions, that being exiled has had a toll on him. I'm accepting that so that I can accept this scene. So that's my thought process there, at least.
I'll be watching it one or two more times, maybe even more than that. I mean, especially over time, I will keep rewatching. But it felt a little interesting. There's definitely one god, Osiris, or the avatar of Osiris, taking the lead. We saw some of the other ones there as well. But then, I think you're right, Hathor, that avatar was more involved. It sounds like maybe that Hathor had a relationship, dated, whatever it may be, with Khonshu at some point. So that could have been why they had that person in the Ennead, even if they weren't in the Ennead, because they did it in the comics or something. So I think it was very interesting, and I'm not sure how they're going to get Khonshu out.
I think it's gonna have to come back to Hathor. I think she is going to have mercy on Mark. We'll call it Mark for the sake, whether it's Mark or Steven or whoever it ends up being. I think she's going to have mercy on him and end up helping him in some way to try and, I don't know. I think she's going to maybe she'll look into it more, look into Harrow a little more, discover he's up to something, but realize that she can't bring it forward and help Mark. Right now, they really don't have any way into that pyramid, into that room, to get to that room without going through a portal.
Yeah.
They don't have any deity on their side right now. So they need a deity on their side. And I think that's where she's going to come in.
I agree. Now, one thing I wanted to talk about also with the whole, you were saying about will she help, I guess Mark or Steven, or if Jake shows up. One thing that just popped in my head as you were saying that, I didn't even write this down or think about it ahead of time, but is we've talked about previously with Steven being what Mark thinks Layla needs. For Jake, I'm thinking it's going to look a different way, because we have in this episode where Layla's starting to get a hint that Mark was involved in her father's death.
Mm-hmm.
I'm thinking it's possible that Jake Lockley is Mark's way of dealing with the brutality he did, saying, oh no, that was Jake. Even though he doesn't know Jake exists, it's kind of like how it will come out of I didn't do that, Jake did that. That so part Jake, of me is there.
Yeah. Be the personality of kind of a repressed past.
Right.
Well, of his days as a more extreme mercenary that he has kind of tried to leave behind him and tried to force out of his own being, turn into a new personality. Very well could. Yeah, I like that. I could definitely see that. And the whole thing about Layla's father, he was an archaeologist, he was killed. It's probably part of that group that they were accusing Steven/Mark of last episode being a part of. So
right.
The pieces are all there. The question for me is, did he actually participate? Is the secret that Jake or Mark, but probably Jake, actually did kill her father, and Mark has been kind of hiding it, or even didn't know and maybe found out later? Or is it that he was part of the group who went out to do this, and then like in the comics, he turned on them. Like he decided he didn't want any part of that, turned on them, and that's where he was killed and became the avatar of Khonshu. My guess is it's going to be that one. That, and he might not even know which one it is himself. Mark might not know. It might have been Jake, and it might be that Jake was part of that group. Jake turned on the other mercenaries. Jake was killed. Then Mark wakes up thinking that he actually killed the father. I don't know, but yeah, I agree with that.
Now, what'd you think of the one-off villain? I don't think he's necessarily might not be a one-off villain, but the antiques collector guy who was riding a horse, had this big house and stuff. Like, what'd you think of that whole scene, that whole place?
So yeah, Mogart was the character. First off, sad news, that actor had actually passed away that played Mogart.
I didn't know that.
So since filming, he actually passed away. I believe it was in a skiing accident. So
oh, wow.
A little sad there. But I kind of enjoyed that whole scene because they needed to find a way to get there without the scarab. I liked it for a couple of reasons. One thing, I really like their depiction of Egypt in this episode. I feel like so many movies and shows, when they show people go to Egypt, it's just ancient Egypt. Because that's what a lot of people think of. They think of the pyramids, they think of the Sphinx, they think of the desert, and that's where things seem to kind of stage all their scenes. But this one didn't. It had in Cairo, in the city, it had in the streets with the people trying to sell their wares. It had the houses of different people. So I did kind of enjoy the scenery there, showing a little more of what I assume would be more real modern Egypt. I liked the whole kind of fight between Stephen and Mark. They were both very necessary there at different times. And because they don't really play nicely together yet, they don't cooperate, they don't share the body, it was a much more difficult fight than it should have been. From solving the riddle to fighting those guys on the horses. And so it was very interesting to watch that back and forth between them.
I agree. I thought it was really funny how Mr. Knight got stabbed through several times, and he was like, take the body, take the body. Take the body. Yeah. Where he's like, I can't do this.
Right.
That was good.
Yeah. And actually, on the note too of that antiques collector, Mogart. So Mogart is actually in the comics, that's Midnight Man. And so that's one thing I wanted to bring up, was that they had multiple different people in this show that were comic characters that I don't think are ever going to show up again. So I kind of liked, that was my favorite one. Mogart was Midnight Man. And I love that because, so Midnight Man, I don't know a lot about the character, but I know that he got his name because he usually steals at midnight. At the stroke of midnight is when he commits his crimes. I liked the callback to that because he was killed at the stroke of midnight. when the moon meringue, I don't know what the thing's called, but the throwing moon is thrown at him, and he's hit and falls off his horse, and you're like, okay, he just died. As it hits him, the clock strikes midnight, and it goes to Khonshu standing on top of it saying "Tick tock, Mark," and you see that it is exactly midnight. I kind of like that callback. And in regards to the names, there was also the Counterfeiter at the beginning of the episode. Her name was Lagaro, which clearly not the same character, but in the comics, Lagaro is Dynaman. That's the name of Dynaman, who lived in Egypt. He has a relationship with Egypt there. Definitely, I am 100% certain she is not going to be Dynaman. So a lot of reasons that's not going to happen, but I kind of liked kind of that callback there. And then I don't think this is actually anything, but the avatar of Osiris His name was Salim or Salim. I'm not sure how it's pronounced because I only know it because it was in the subtitles when he was speaking. And that's one of Miles Morales' clones. They're not. I don't think they're actually going to call this a tie-in. I don't think there's going to be a connection to Spider-Man. But I still just love that they were using names that aren't everyday names that we hear everywhere else. But they were making sure to put it into the subtitles, put it into the script, that this is their characters' names. And there is a character with those names elsewhere in the comics. It's just something I thought was fun throughout this episode, finding those little things.
So I will say that when they were approaching this compound looking for the antiques, and we're talking about this person that has resources and everything, my head immediately went to Power Broker. I was like, oh, are they going to do some crossover and bring Sharon Carter in here and do the Power Broker thing? And that's going to be the only real crossover from Moon Knight to anything else MCU, because currently nothing. No crossovers, no mentions, no nothing. It's completely isolated.
And they did mention Madripoor.
Exactly.
That they talk about that Layla and Mogart knew each other in Madripoor, that she has a history with stealing these black market items. So, yeah, we finally do have some connection.
Yeah. I mean, that one little Madripoor. But, like, even that was like, okay, Power Broker. Like, it's going to be a Power Broker. Like, but it wasn't. Maybe there may be some ties back. But I really am waiting for some big something to tie in with other MCU with Moon Knight. And it may not happen until after credits of the final episode, or who knows, or it might not even happen at all. Like, give it its own thing. But yeah, I was just wanted to point that out. I was like, oh, it's gonna be Sharon, it's gonna be Power Broker, and it wasn't. And I was like, okay, Mogart, still cool, pretty cool, but yeah, I definitely thought it was gonna be Power Broker there.
Yeah, it would have been nice to see Power Broker, to see Sharon Carter in there, and maybe, but yeah, having at some point some callback to one of these other shows would be great. One thing, this is a bit of a wild theory. It's not even a theory, it's just a wild thought, is what if they are delaying the Thor Love and Thunder trailer until something happens, either Multiverse of Madness or Moon Knight? Because I do know at one point in the comics, Moon Knight is able to control the hammer, Thor's hammer. Oh, because the rock is actually made from a moon.
Yeah.
I highly doubt they'll go this way. But what if that's how the hammer gets put back together? Is it shows up in some way here, and he puts it back together in order to be able to control it and launch it at a wall or something, and then he leaves it.
This series leads up to Multiverse of Madness. So the last episode is the Wednesday before, or a week before. I forget if it's exactly the Wednesday before or the week before. Multiverse of Madness comes out. So this whole series will be done. Multiverse of Madness will come out. I could see Moon Knight putting the hammer Mjolnir back together in like an after credits scene.
Yeah,
I could see that where he like just feels something from it, and it like puts itself back together in front of him, and then Thor shows up, or whoever it may be. Like, and then I do think that the trailer for Love and Thunder will be in the Multiverse of Madness after credits, because that seems like something they may be doing more again. We had it at the very beginning of Avengers MCU. They had it once again for Spider-Man for leading into Multiverse of Madness. Yeah, I could see them doing the after credits as more of trailers again, because they haven't done, or not planning on doing these big crossover Avengers size movies anymore and teasing towards that over and over again. So there might be some fun teasers, but I think we might see a lot more trailers again.
Could be. Yeah. It was kind of fun at the end of No Way Home. I enjoyed that. Though I do really like those little scenes that has some special meaning. So
me too.
We'll see.
Yep. What else? Anything else from this episode that you really wanted to make sure we talked about?
Definitely. When they decide to turn back the stars. I just want to know, what do you think actually happened there? Did they turn back time? Did they just visualize differently?
I don't think they turned back time. The reason I say that is because we saw people in the city reacting to the stars rewinding. So I don't think, unless it was like a bubble, but I doubt that was the case. I actually feel like the entire planet just saw stars whizzing by. And so, I mean, at this point in the world, half of all people got snapped out by an alien and came back through time travel. The Avengers are all known and celebrated and everything. So at this point, stars streaking through the sky like that might not really even be that big of a deal.
Yeah. Oh, look, it's Tuesday.
Yeah, I think it's mostly visual. I don't think the stars actually warp through the sky because that would mess with a whole lot of aliens and other galaxies. So I think it's mostly visual. I don't think he actively moved all the stars in the sky. I think the night sky just he had to turn back the visual of it.
Okay.
That
was my thought as well. I've been seeing online people talking about some crazy theories about what had actually happened, and I'm like, I think it was just kind of like bending the light and kind of rewinding like a giant TV screen over us, that he rewound it back to that night so we could see the stars, and then it snapped back immediately to where it actually everything actually was. And so I think we're done with this. But I do want to say this was such an unnecessary sacrifice because there's an app for that.
very true.
There are night sky apps that you can punch in a date and it'll tell you exactly where all the stars were at that time. They could have just been like, okay, what was the date, Khonshu? Or like, can you give me some, like how many days ago this was if you remember every night? I know they needed it for the show, but it's just kind of funny to think. I'm like, pretty sure I've seen that in an app before. I think technology could have helped here. Iron Man had a solution. Yeah.
Yeah, that's the thing. I mean, I said it already. I feel like there were some inconsistencies for me in this episode. That's not a big deal to me. I wish it could have happened a different way. But like there's different things I felt like dragged for me in this episode, just as like an overall, where we first see Mark just like doing parkour through the city tops, and then he gets to a random place and is like, oh, I need to talk to that guy. I just felt like that it didn't feel real. It didn't feel like a good introduction to just all of a sudden fighting these random three thugs. Like a lot of it just seemed like a weird start. Like something was cut out of it, edited out to make it fit for time. I don't know. It just felt a little off to me. It's just there's a few places like that I felt didn't feel quite tonally correct or felt like it belonged there.
Gotcha. I think that's fair. For me, I think I am not ready to rate it because honestly, I am so immersed in the story and so excited for it right now that my affinity towards suspension of disbelief is so incredibly high that like anything that's happening here, I can write it off as okay. Well, there's a reason. Whether we know that reason or not, I'm accepting it. I think I've only watched this episode 3 times, so I think maybe when the season's over, if I go back and rewatch these episodes again, maybe then I'll be able to come to a little more of a conclusion there. At this point, I'm just so into it that I've loved all 3 episodes thus far. This was definitely more. This is a Mark episode more than a Steven. The last 2 were Steven ones. Definitely a very different feel than the prior 2. This had a little more Indiana Jones type of feel to it than the other 2, but I have no problem with that. It was different, but I loved all 3 of them.
We're only halfway through the series or season.
We are.
Series.
We're exactly halfway through.
Exactly halfway through the season, and I feel like so much has happened, and I'm like, there's not much left to go, right? But there is still half of a season to go. I mean, it's 3 episodes, but I feel like there's going to be a lot happening.
Yeah, I feel like so much has happened that you feel like you should be so like really far through. If this is a movie, I feel like enough has happened for us to reach the conclusion of the movie. But also so many questions are still out there. There's so much left to answer that it feels like we're still being shown questions at this point. And Are we going to get a whole bunch of answers in the final episode, or are we going to start easing into answers? Or is it just going to be jumping up and down, more questions, more answers until we reach the end when hopefully we have enough to be satisfied? I'll really be curious there.
I'm curious too, and they keep on bringing up like you're unwell, if there's something wrong with you. Like I think they are still, maybe it's just me hoping, but I still think they're leading into that asylum, that season 2. Maybe season 1 for like if it's one episode a thing, but I really hope it's actually like the start of season 2, where they solve the thing here, and then he just wakes up in an asylum, and that's where they end it.
Could be. I will say, I've now, since last week, I've seen a building, the inside of a building that looks like an asylum twice.
The end credits always has one.
Okay. I hadn't noticed prior to this week. This week, I'm like, maybe I just don't pay enough attention during the end credits. But although I've always been distracted by that 3 faces of Stephen Grant / Mark Spector. But I never noticed before. There's one of them in the end credits scene. You see what looks like a nice, white, clean, possibly psychiatric ward type of location. But there's also a preview for this week. Or I thought it was for this week. And it showed him in that building. Very, very briefly. He didn't interact with anyone. I think he was running through a hall or stumbling through a hall or something like that. But he was just in there on his own. And it was there and then it was gone. So I definitely think it's going to show up this season.
Okay.
But I don't feel like it's going to be a big storyline. So if they want to do what they did in the comics, the larger idea of this, then it would have to be a return there next season.
You could always introduce it and then bring it back. We'll see. But overall, final thoughts. How are you feeling about the series and that 3rd episode?
I'm loving it. I'm all in on this series. I feel like Oscar Isaac is just doing such a great job of being different at different times and needing to be different at different times and looking so confused at each step of the way, looking confused in different ways for different personalities. So I think he's doing a great job. And I love the show. I think the whole adventure side of it is a lot of fun. So I'm loving the show thus far. I'm hoping the second half is as good as the first half. And we'll see what other mysteries they throw at me. As far as the 3rd episode, yeah, it was definitely very different. I feel like because I've bought in so much through the first 2 episodes, I do admit that there are a couple of areas in episode 3 that I was like, okay, they needed that to happen. But I accept it. I was okay with it.
I'll say, I mean, I still love this series. I'm super excited about it. I feel like the second half is going to be much better than the first half. And I still like the first half. I feel like they're gonna have to round out a lot, and it's gonna just make it action packed, have a lot of good stuff in there, do the more reveal on Jake. I feel like there's a lot coming still. So I'm very excited to see what else is coming down the road, as well as probably once this series is over, all the questions that'll have to wait for the following season. I said series. I keep on saying series. This season's over. I'm going to have a lot of thoughts for next season. It's going to lead to a lot of theory videos, which we do every Monday. There's going to be a lot that comes out of this season that I'm excited to dive into even further. I'm probably going to rip apart the end credits scene like crazy afterwards.
Yeah. I expect nothing less.
All right. Well, thanks everyone for watching. We are the Uncanny J-Men. I am Jade.
I am Josh.
Thank you for watching, and please like, subscribe, and there's a little bell for notifications down there if you feel so inclined. Thank you for joining us.